Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Kitchen. And today it is a very special occasion. We are recording Leadership Kitchen in English for the first time. And it is my honor and joy to have Heather Horton as my guest in the kitchen today. And Heather is helping busy professionals struggling with grief to turn that pain into power. She is life and joy catalyst, and she is also a speaker and a coach. Heather, thank you so much for accepting my invitation to join me today here, and welcome. Heather, would you like to add something to your introduction?
Olya, thank you for this space. No, there is nothing we need to add. I appreciate the fact that I love what you just said. This is the first podcast episode in English. I'm honored that you chose me and to have a conversation with you today. And I'm excited to share with your audience.
Great, Heather. So let me start with my first usual question, and it would be about leadership phenomenon. What is it for you? What stands behind leadership for you?
That is a great question. For me, it's seeing people as human, which that human aspect to me separates managers from leaders. You can be a manager in name, but if you're only concerned about the data, the numbers, meeting a specific sales goal, you're missing out on the one thing that we were all created for: relationships, building relationships. And that is what separates leaders from managers. Leaders go first, because you can't lead where you haven't been. And leaders allow the people that they support to shine.
This definition resonates with me so much. So leaders support their teams so that teams could shine. They build relationships. They see human behind just professionals. Thank you for sharing that, Heather. And we will be exploring the topic of leadership and grief today. So I can't stop from asking you, what's grief for you?
Grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss or change or transition of any kind. And I say that because a lot of people feel that grief is just about physical death. And that's only one part of it. Grief involves emotional deaths. Again, the end of or the change in any familiar pattern of behavior produces grief. And so if we are not self-aware, or if we don't engage in some type of self-reflection, as we were talking before the show, it's the little things that become big things. So much so that when the big thing happens, there's like sensory overload. And I'll give you an example. When in my life, 1 year into my career as a lawyer, my mother and I were involved in a single car accident with several other family members. And she died the day after the accident. And my aunt, who was with us, died 2 weeks later. And I say that to say, when I started this journey about sharing my grief, I thought that grief was only about physical death myself, and didn't realize that my parents' divorce, probably 10 years or 10 to 15 years before that, was something that I wasn't self-aware about, didn't process. And I say all that to say, I didn't consider that as grief. Every change, loss, and transition that happens in our life, if we don't move through it, if we suppress the feelings, keep busy, think that time will heal all wounds, when the next big thing happens, that other thing is still there. Grief is cumulative, and it's cumulatively negative if we don't process, if we don't find a way to move through. And then grief starts to show up in the body. It can affect us physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. Grief can even drive us away from God. It is something that can impact our leadership as well, because everything we are as a person, we bring into our professional space. There is no compartmentalizing. You can't put on your professional mask and not bring what you've experienced in life, what you've been exposed to, into work. And so that's why it's very important to know what grief is, so you know how to manage it. Again, you can't treat something until you've acknowledged it. So my goal as a Life and Joy Catalyst is to help people to see the little things, to be able to be self-aware, be self-compassionate, giving themselves grace, to feel what's happening and not let it impact a person's self-worth. Because, and what just came to me is John 16:33, in this life you will have trouble, but be of good cheer because I have overcome the world. We can't avoid trials and tribulations, and we need to equip ourselves with the tools to be able to ebb and flow with the grief that is inevitably going to show up in our lives.
There stands gratitude for you having trust to this space to share your story, and for sharing your wisdom in regards to grief and the importance of being self-aware, self-compassionate, and having self-worth. And now I would like to invite you to go into the business context, since many of our listeners are from business world. Could you please share an example what grief could be in the business context, at work, in profession?
One of the things about grief that shows up in leadership in the business world is with respect to organizational change. A lot of times people look at organizational change as innovation. However, with innovation comes someone loses. Everything that's new means something that's old no longer exists. And a lot of times I don't think people actually recognize that, because when a team changes or when a project ends, I think rarely is there time or our people are presented with time to process the feelings around it. We don't take time to reflect and to honor what has happened. And that may sound different to say honor what you've lost or what has changed or what has transitioned, because that's the only way you're going to be able to move to the next thing. Because otherwise you're just replacing the loss, replacing what is now different without checking in with your heart. We have to check in with how we feel, and our feelings are tied to our heart, because when change, loss, and transition happens, people don't say, oh, my head's broken. The first and most powerful thing that people say, and I don't even think they listen to themselves, is I'm heartbroken, or my heart is broken. And instead of ignoring that, we need to go deeper and figure out what that means for ourselves. And when organizational change happens, there's also other losses that come into play. There is the loss of identity, because maybe the thing that's changed was who you were or who you thought you were. And now that this project or program has ended, you don't know where you fit in anymore. You don't know if you even belong anymore. Yet you're in a new position and you're expected to show up with excellence. Loss of control. When innovation happens And if it's not your company, and even if it is your company, there can be a loss of control because you can't anticipate or you can't plan for every little thing that's going to happen. And we have to recognize that we don't control anything. We are in this world for a purpose, and that purpose is what helps us to be able to spread the gospel to the world. It's interesting. Last night I was listening to a podcast and I realized that my God-given purpose is actually my way that I am to evangelize in the world. And this is a side note, but I feel like it was a light bulb that went off to help me with sales because I am passionate about sharing my God-given purpose with the world, which is helping people to move through grief and turn their pain into power and also reclaim abundant life and joy. With loss of control, we have to recognize that only God is sovereign and that we are never going to be in control, even when we think we are. And so in those moments in leadership, when that happens, we have to take a moment to, again, honor the change, the loss, and transition, because that's the only way we're going to be able to move into the next thing in the most emotionally healthy space, but also in a space where we're not feeling heartbroken. We're not feeling resentment. Again, innovation is something that it's celebrated, but it also needs to be mourned, if that makes sense. Again, we have to look at both sides to be able to move forward in an emotionally healthy way. And I think a lot of times we only look at what's new, what's shiny, and that failure to pay attention to what has changed can be the difference between creating chaos in your business to actually being able to thrive through change. And as a leader, it's really important for you to have these, have check-ins with the people that work for you, because they too need to process their feelings around organizational change, innovation. And they may not have the capacity or the courage to do that on their own. So again, that's a fine line or a distinction between leaders and managers, because a manager is not going to think about having those conversations, or a manager is not going to care about what someone feels because they want to make the sales projection, or that's their concern. That's what a manager is concerned about. A leader is concerned about people, relationships, and developing those relationships, whatever that looks like. Because again, it goes back to that humanity piece. I'm trying to think of the other losses that come with organizational change. Loss of time. A person may have served in a position for 30 years, or maybe let's make it less than that. Maybe 15 years. A person's been at the top of his game or her game. And then all of a sudden, because things have changed in the economy, that division or that section is no longer a hot commodity or trendy. And this person not only loses their identity, but they've also lost time. 10, 15 years after doing the same thing, it's hard to reimagine or reset your identity. But no one takes the time to sit with that person to figure out what else is it can they do, or what is the loss they've experienced and how do they feel about that. It's vitally important. Again, we cannot expect people to do this on their own. Hopefully they are, but if they aren't, they still need a space to be able to process those feelings, because that's the only way they're going to be able to move forward in an emotionally healthy way.
Heather, by listening to you, I just thought that grief is imminent part of life, imminent part of doing business, and to convert pain to power, one need to accept the grief, to accept the change, process it so that it would become a stepping stone for future developments, achievements, future changes, basically, which will bring more grief. And again, the grief could be source of future strength. And while sharing examples of what grief could be in a business world, loss of identity, loss of time, loss of control, you've shared abundantly advices as to what a leader can do to convert the pain into power. And the one which resonated with me a lot is check-ins. And I try to start my team meetings with check-ins and then check-outs to help my team process griefs and changes we are living through. Are there any other things you would think of about what leaders can do for themselves, for their teams, to help process grief?
I think for leaders, for themselves, again, to have this time of self-reflection, making sure that they have a vision or a plan in place and always checking in with that to make sure that they are in alignment. Checking in to make sure that the actions they're taking are aligned with their values. Really actually identifying what your values are, because a lot of times we don't know what that is. A lot of times we are walking through life programmed from our foundational relationships, from what we've been exposed to. What I'm getting at is sometimes we don't have an original thought because we are living the lives that were programmed for us or that we saw. And again, that's why I go back to a lot of times it's important for self-reflection, because what do you think? Yes, as a child, you had to follow the rules and regulations of your parents and your guardians and those in authority. But when you become an adult, maybe that's not the way you want to live your life. And so, or maybe you want to do something different, but that has to initiate with you. And you have to be okay with maybe some of what I learned maybe doesn't add value to me anymore, or I want to do it in a different way. And you have the ability to do that. But again, it requires courage, and it requires you to let go of what doesn't serve you anymore so you can be the person that God created you to be. I think another thing is to learn to manage your expectations. A lot of times in the professional world, we expect because someone has an MBA or went to a particular school that means something. So much so that we start to assume things rather than ask questions and be curious. We can't assume because a person went to a certain school or has a certain degree that they know anything, for that matter. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice as leaders and as managers if we don't lead with curiosity, because assumptions means there's something we're not clear on. If we're making assumptions, even if we know this person, that doesn't negate the opportunity to be curious, because although someone operated in a particular way yesterday, that doesn't mean that that's the way they want to operate today.
Peter, while listening to you, I thought that perhaps the main task that leader might have is to create space to allow time for change to be processed, for grief to be processed, so that they would not be happening to us, but rather for us. Would this resonate with you?
Yes, I agree. Not to us, but for us. Because I think God orchestrates situations for us to keep us in alignment with Him. And to us, that looks like, well, there's a loss of control. Like this isn't going the way that I planned. However, all things are working together for our good, per Romans 8:28. So no matter what happens, it's not a setback. It's not a failure. It's part of the the plan that God has for your life. It's it's the way your steps are ordered. And every good thing comes from God. And I think a lot of times we want to leave God out of business. We want to leave God out of leadership. But he is the ultimate entrepreneur, the ultimate coach, leader. And the examples that are set, not only by God, but by his son Jesus, is our roadmap for life, but also for grief. Because if we look at how Jesus walked through the garden, walked through the 33 years of his life, he took on human flesh to be our example, to be our standard, even through grief.
And another thought which I just got is that grief happens to us when things are evolving as we didn't plan them. But as soon as we accept that it's God's plan for our life, it changes our perspective and gives us strength to serve again. And we are almost at the end of this conversation, Heather. And I have this tradition about asking my guests to share one recipe of leadership so that it would stay in the kitchen. So could I ask you, please share your recipe of leadership? Recipe by Heather Horton.
I think I would just be repeating myself from things I've already shared earlier. I believe the recipe for leadership is to connect with your source at the beginning of your day, in the middle of your day, and at the end of your day. Always make sure that you are taking action that is aligned with your values, because that's going to help you to stay in a space of abundant life and joy. Process or look at every detail of your life, or maybe not every detail, because God has that under control, but make sure that you are paying attention and are self-aware when change, loss, and transition happens. Don't suppress those feelings. Acknowledge them, honor them, embrace them, so that you're able to move forward in an emotionally healthy way, so that you're able to ebb and flow with all that life brings. Let it simmer. Pour into yourself. Find out what it is that fills your cup. Incorporate that into your day, into your life. And then rinse and repeat that with everyone that you support, be it personally or professionally.
Heather, I'm grateful to you for being able to connect with my source today. And I do believe that our listeners will have an opportunity to explore their source and to connect to their source. And I'm taking away from our conversation that we can bring more life. We can have life even when we go through change, even when we are grieving. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your story with me today. And again, it was my honor and my joy to have this conversation. Thank you.
Olya, thank you for just the opportunity to share and be a part of the Leadership Kitchen. I'm grateful for how God orchestrated us divinely meeting, and am grateful for the relationship and friendship that we continue to have even beyond that. I appreciate you and know that the Leadership Kitchen is making a difference in people's lives. Not what I wanted to say, but that's what's coming out. And I just saw a bug on my desk. So
thank you for your encouragement. Thank you.
I think it's divine in the way that you've named your podcast, because we are all called to be leaders as children of God, and we get to figure out what that is, pour the ingredients in, and test and approve in the kitchen. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the Leadership Kitchen.